Welcome, everybody. I hope you've all had a nice Monday morning so far. All right, well, I'm gonna get things going. We're right at noon. Welcome, everybody. And Megan, yeah, do you want to start the recording? Oops.
I think it's going.
So welcome, everyone, to this panel entitled OE, Does It Really Benefit Students? I'm Danielle Dubien, and I'm here as the moderator for the panel. I've been involved in open education for over 10 years. I've done development adaptation of OERs, offered training on open licensing, and done research on institutional adoption of OERs in higher education. And I'm currently a curriculum developer at the Center for Continuing Education. So before we go any further, I am going to do the land acknowledgement. So I am in Moose Jaw. I'm on the traditional lands referred to as Treaty 4 territory, the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'm committed to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And as a personal action that I take in the way of reconciliation is what I'm doing is in my academic research, I make a point of including articles either or ideally by Indigenous people about Indigenous topics, but either of those topics as well, by Indigenous people about whatever topic they prefer, or about Indigenous learning. Okay, we're going to have a little bit of housekeeping. Okay, so just so you're aware, this session is being recorded. Please stay muted to avoid distracting background noises, but please feel free to ask questions in the chat box. They'll be moderated by not Donna, but Megan. Some will be addressed in the second last portion of the discussion if we have time for a Q&A. And if so, please indicate which panelist or panelists your question is for. Students, since this session is about the learning benefits for students, they can either write in the chat or open their mic throughout the session. So I understand that that can be really daunting. It can be really scary to talk in front of a group like this, but you are welcome. This is your place. This is about you. So just to remind you, the topic is whether students benefit from OER and how. We had a student survey that Donna designed and had sent out to students who used OER in their classes. And this panel, how it's going to work is that there'll be an alternation. I'll be alternating between showing data and inviting the panelists to speak about the data. And at the same time, there'll also be prompts for participants in the chat box. If it's too distracting, don't feel you have to respond to the prompts. It's however you feel comfortable. Okay, at this stage, I'd like to invite Megan to introduce herself.
Yeah, so I'm Megan Ashcroft. I am a librarian at Regina campus. I'm also part of the OER Hub group. And yeah, I'm very interested in how OER can help students and how we can make them accessible, not only in terms of, dollars and cents, but make them the best tools that they can have for their learning.
And on the panel, we have Kriztel Sayana, who is a Sask Polytech Student Association representative. She's the campus representative in Saskatoon and is currently in year 1 of early childhood education. We have Donna Thiessen, the scholarly communication librarian. She's been in her current position with Sask Polytech for almost 2 years, focusing on supporting the development of programs related to open education resources and other scholarly pursuits. Prior to this, she managed a number of public and academic libraries, developed a program to support crime-free rental housing for Saskatoon police, and worked as a designer of cities. She sees this position as an opportunity to realize her social justice aspirations and is inspired by the open vision of Rajiv Jangiani and Mahabali. She also aspires to be an adventure librarian. We have Sara Hanson, who's a faculty member of Sask Polytech. She teaches 2 sections of ECE 142 from the Regina campus. And Leah Danyluk, who is an ECE instructor on the Saskatoon campus. Over the last 5 years, she's been an instructor, practicum monitor, and subject matter expert. Prior, she worked in early learning for a decade, and she's passionate about play. Okay, so I'd like to begin with just a simple question. This is for the panelists. What OER have you used, and what motivated you to use OER?
I'll answer that one. We have an OER for the course ECE 142. That class is in the early childhood education program, and it's health, safety, and nutrition. So the OER was actually adapted for the course by a faculty member named Carrie Flagel. She can't be here today, I think, due to illness. But to be completely honest, it was given to us as an opportunity. Carrie reached out. She wanted to try adapting an OER. And she found one that kind of fit with this course. So she adapted it. And this was our first year using it on all of our campuses. So Saskatoon, Regina, and PA. And it's a pilot project. Really, it was the first one to just see how it goes with us. And Kriztel is actually a student in class that that uses this OER, so we're very connected on that. I teach her the course.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Kriztel.
Hi, so I currently work for the student associations, and we are very interested in OERs due to the rise of suggestions and comments and conversations we've been having with the students about their problems with textbooks in general. And that is one of like the main highlight that we were looking into and focusing on. As Leah said, that I've already mentioned some of the words that have been shared with me from other students. And we were really interested in how we can expand this further, not only in our program, but in terms of the entirety of Sask Poly. And we've been gathering information, and we've been surveying a couple of the students and talking one-to-one during Council Connect. And these are like one of, no, not even one, it's the main issue that is a recurring theme that we keep hearing. So we are vastly interested and invested in moving this forward.
And in case anyone isn't very familiar with OER movements, student advocacy tends to be something that very much pushes how and whether it's adopted. So the student voice is extremely important.
I'm going to throw one into chat, and probably if you've been to Sask Polytechnic a while, you're familiar with this one. But I created a directory of OERs. I started with the BC campus one, which was fabulous, but I've adapted it for Sask Polytechnic and for our old structure, not necessarily our new structure, because it's being adapted as we speak, but it will be updated to reflect the new structure. And it's a place for people to go to start to explore what OERs are out there, what textbooks could I use that might be applicable for my course. So it's not comprehensive by any means, but it's a good resource to start with.
Yeah, it's nice to start without overwhelming people. Sara, did you want to answer?
Well, my answer would be very similar to Leah's, of course, because we're teaching the same course with the OER, but I would definitely say that I have seen benefits using the OER with my students. I see a lot more reference to the textbook. I think because it's easy to use, it's easy to find things because the links are right from our course into the textbook. And students who maybe couldn't afford a textbook have the OER to use. And I definitely have seen benefits having taught this course before with a paper textbook moving into an OER. And in the field of health and safety, the nice thing about the OER is everything is very up to date, very current for health issues and just the different things that come up with health. Of course, health is constantly changing. We know that. And so I've seen real benefits to very up-to-date information in that OER.
All right, so let's get into some of the survey data. Okay, so some of the early questions in the survey were, how important are some advantages to OER? So Donna presented a selection of advantages that the students could choose from to indicate which were most important to them. And they were given the option to write in answers as well. So some of the most important qualities they found of OER were that they were a free textbook and they allow for ongoing access to the textbook after they graduate, as opposed to books that you might have to sell or that you can only rent even if you have access to them online. And some of the written in answers were they enjoyed the convenience, so the portability of the OER, either on a USB stick or on the computer. It caused for less clutter. It wasn't a problem if they forgot the textbooks at home, so that assumes that they have their laptop with them, and they enjoy the adaptability of them. And as for disadvantages, the most important ones that they selected were about the technological issues with accessing the resource. So what happens if you don't have a laptop, or what happens if your Wi-Fi is down? And so one of the issues too is that the textbook is only available online, and written in answers is they can't highlight the text. Though I imagine that some formats of OER do allow for that, but in this case, no. And some materials aren't hyperlinked that they would have preferred. So I'm going to stop the share and ask the panelists, what kind of impacts do either of these advantages or disadvantages, what are the impacts you think of them on learning?
I'll chime in. Kriztel, sorry if you were. One thing that I took away from that slide is that the students do have access to the OER after they graduate. And for this particular class that we're referring to, health, safety, and nutrition, that is very, very valuable, because we talk about things around all kinds of safety issues and, health concerns for children. And of course, we learn about them. The students learn about them during the course, but it's a 12-week course. And so when they go out on practicum or when they enter the field, they might forget, they might need, or they might have something come up in their work that they haven't dealt with before. Maybe we did look at it class or in their OER, but they haven't dealt with it hands-on. And so they have that information to refer back to, and it's easily accessible. So they don't have to go digging for their old textbook. And like, let's say something happens to them, for them 5 years from now that they have to refer back to, the information will also be updated. So that piece is really handy. Yeah, I'll let Sara and Kriztel speak to the other bits.
In terms of the affordability, and to expand on that a little bit, a couple of the students that have reached through us is the fact that they believe that the cost of the textbook versus the use of it sometimes is not proportionate. So we've heard students paying more than up to $400 for textbooks. That is just not feasible when they're not using more than 20% of it. So when we think of OER, again, that's something that has more flexibility in terms of it benefits students. How does it matter how much of the textbook you actually use or you actually need to use, because you didn't invest hundreds and hundreds of dollars into it. Another thing that we are really focusing on is transparency in terms of the prices. When it's OER, they know it's free. They don't need to set aside money for it, especially now that we have had issues with the pricing in the bookstore not being equivalent to what's actually being sent or communicated to the students. And people are not ready to just drop $200 on the bat like that when the prices change. And even with regret of sometimes they finally realize that the book is accessible other means, but then they already spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars over some of these textbooks. So having that worry and anxiety is so unwanted and unnecessary for the students carrying on or starting another program in like with this textbook affordability issues. So I can see why the main focus in that survey was like, it's free, it's accessible, I don't need to pay for anything. It takes away a lot of the stress of like getting money for books and stuff like that. And I feel like that is the main thing that we are trying to focus on. It's the fact that financially, economically at the moment, we don't have that much extra to pay for so many books that are so expensive.
And Kriztel, the flip side of your point is that what I've read from the literature is that when an instructor has a commercial textbook and they don't even have an option for an OER, when they've got a commercial textbook that they feel is needed for the course, and they feel that only 3 of, let's say, 8 chapters are relevant, they feel a pressure themselves to use the chapters that aren't relevant to the course, or they feel the pressure of just using the 3 chapters, knowing that the students have paid for the whole book but aren't using the whole thing. So just so you're aware, some instructors have a certain anxiety too, even though it doesn't ultimately help the students. So hopefully in time, there'll be more OER produced so that we can resolve this kind of issue. Did any other panelists? Go ahead, Sara.
I find too that just having that like direct connection, it's in our course, they link to the textbook. When they get into the OER, things like our childcare regulations that specifically apply to that content, the link is right there in the OER. So everything's in one place. They're not flipping from the childcare regulations, which we use a lot in this course, in most of our courses, but in this course specifically, it's linked right in the content of the OER. And I just had an assignment where they used, and I couldn't believe how much more they used our textbook than now that it's an OER than they would have even ever gone to one of our paper textbooks. So it's definitely having everything in one place is very, very helpful, especially those childcare regulations aren't always easy to work your way through. But when the link is right in that OER, then they use it and they remember it, and it's there for them to use when they move out into practicum in a few weeks.
I'm just going to add one thing as well, which doesn't appear on the summary there, but the one surprise item for me, but it's like, oh, that makes so much sense, was the actual physicality of the textbook and the weight of having to carry textbooks around. And being a mom, I know I spent a lot on backpacks and bags for my children in school and then in university as well. Just because that's a lot to carry around. So having the ability to have an online text that's just accessible on your laptop, which most people have access to, is so much easier and so much more accessible just from a physicality perspective as well, which I thought was really interesting.
I was hoping we could discuss one of the disadvantages, which is that students feel that they can't highlight the text. And I know that that's an issue with learning, is that sometimes students, and I'm this way because I started using computers late into my my university studies, but I love having a book or notes that I can highlight. With computers, with digital resources, it's increasingly becoming a thing where people can highlight and even extract their highlighted content and reorganize it and use it somewhere else. We've got open source tools like Hypothesis that people can use for commenting in the margins, though there's different levels of effectiveness in how something like that is used. But how do you feel about that aspect of OER? Do you feel that there are things about it, disadvantages about the format, of a digital OER that makes it harder to study with?
When in terms of like some of the students that I have heard, I think it's also a matter of not all OERs are perfectly sync with certain devices, especially when it comes to like iPads or like lower or like older type models of laptops. So I see the aspect of it where like it's not as accessible, or it's the accessibility part of it is not very fine at the moment, or it's not, we haven't evolved through that yet. But I feel like it still overshadows in terms of like, for people who has accessibility issues, is over books still they can have the audio. That was one of the comments that I saw in the survey, is that they love the fact that they can highlight it and then it will read, because a lot of the laptops now have that function of like it will read out to them. So I understand that the highlighting part is like very, very specific for specific devices. At the moment, our OER for the health and safety, it does do that. We can copy and paste, because I have a newer model of laptops. So I feel like it's a lot of like more of the system or like the server type issues, more specifically for specific students' devices. So again, when we talked about it and when we highlighted that specific issue, it still overpowers the paper one, because there's still more functions with it the moment that it is based on technology and within their like devices.
Okay, so what I'm hearing a little bit is that there's still, one of the disadvantages is the socioeconomic issues. Like, what if a person can't afford the latest device that might be the most helpful for them? Or what if they're in an area, like a rural area, where they don't have access to a solid online connection? Maybe they have to go to a library during whatever their opening hours are to be able to access things. So maybe there's still issues there. But okay, you're saying that the accessibility overcomes the need to take notes, for example. So that's important. So it's important that the accessibility issue is something that's a priority over the way that students learn, because maybe it's easier to adapt how people learn with a tool than to adapt the accessibility features of it.
You know, we're new to this at Sask Polytechnic, like we're learning a lot. And even now I'm thinking about, there's some different formats that we can publish. We're using Pressbooks as our platform, but within Pressbooks, we can create PDFs, we can create EPUBs, so we can create different formats which might allow for more accessibility on different devices, and also allow people to put their comments in, or to highlight things and to make it really their textbook. And, you know, just as we're talking, I'm thinking about maybe we haven't done enough, you know, with sort of highlighting that feature. So to let people know that this is accessible and we can easily make this available.
And Sara, Leah, do you have any comments on these issues about the disadvantages of OER?
I think Kriztel, since she's a student in my course, did a really good job of summing it up. Honestly, I haven't had any students in either of my courses come to me and say that the fact that I can't highlight this or use this in a certain way is problematic for me. They haven't really come and said that. Obviously, you get different data when you ask for it through a survey, but just anecdotally, none of that has been an issue for me this year directly.
I also have not had any students come and complain about any of the technical parts of the OER, so it seems to be working for them, or they figured out how to make it work for them. Like Kriztel said, they can copy and paste from our OER, so if they can't highlight right in the OER, they can copy and paste and make notes in a Word document or a Google Doc or something like that.
And Megan brought up a really good question. And since we're on this topic, I'd like to channel it to the panelists. And the question was, Should more time be spent teaching students how to use these resources better, or do we just assume they'll just know how to use the OER? So is some kind of coaching needed?
I definitely, oh, sorry, Leah, go ahead. I definitely gave a brief overview on how to use the OER in the very first class of this course at the beginning. I went into it, showed them how they could use it, and told them if they had any issues that we could revisit that, but nobody seemed to revisit it. That was enough. It was maybe 20 minutes on showing them how to use the actual OER that we have. So
very similar for me. Yeah, one of the first classes, we opened it up and went through it. And I do find that, you know, students now are technologically literate. Like it's not, it just hasn't been a huge issue. Sometimes there are issues with our Wi-Fi in our building. Specific, Kriztel is nodding her head. But I do find that students help each other. Like if an issue comes up, one of them, and often it is Kriztel, she, like, there are students in the class who can solve those problems really quickly. Maybe they already opened the OER before class that first day, had an issue, clicked around with it, figured it out, and they're very quick to help their peers. And on the issue of time, I think every instructor ever will tell you that there's not a lot of time to spend doing things outside of your direct, course content. So realistically, I don't think that it should be on each individual instructor to spend more time navigating OER. Like the 20 minutes that Sara and I had on our first day of class was probably like literally, this class is jam-packed. That's all we have to spend. Luckily, we didn't need more, so it was kind of a non-issue for us. But just because that's a question, do we need more time to figure that out? I don't know if that's even a realistic ask, unless students had something separate, like them how to navigate OERs.
And Kriztel, did you, on your side, like you talked about accessibility, so my question is on two levels. Did you feel that there was anything else you needed to learn about how to use OER overall? And more specifically, was there any help that you noticed the students needed regarding accessibility?
In terms of, since we started using Brightspace already in the first term, and a lot of 2 out of 5 of our books were online, though we had to pay, it wasn't free. It wasn't such a big thing when we started using the OER. It was very, very similar to how other ebooks were working at the moment. I think the main issue is what Leah highlights. The OER is in a Sask Poly server, so it had to be very specific that they needed to be within the server or within a specific Wi-Fi for it to work. That was the main issue. And sometimes our Wi-Fi is like glitchy in terms of like it will shut down and open, and then the book will like have an error where you have to like re-sign up and redo it again. And again, I feel like that is not a problem of the OER. It was more of like we have system issue within our building that makes it hard to access. And sometimes when the internet is slow, some of our students that are having accessibility issues who do the Audible stuff will not work or it will glitch. So I don't think it's based on the OER. It's more of just we just need a better system or a better Wi-Fi for it to work seamlessly throughout the board.
So that is indeed an issue when it comes to OER. So it's an obstacle that's beyond the level. Sometimes it's beyond the level of the institution. Sometimes it's a matter of infrastructure in the location, the city or the country. And that can be something. So that is a point that people account for when they develop OER. If you look in the research literature and you're looking at the different scales of types of problems that we can have, it is very definitely a barrier that's been identified. And again, it comes up for people in rural areas or people who are in areas that are just for whatever reason not served with the best internet connection available. We have a question from Myra in the chat. We'll pop to this question and then we'll get back to the survey. But the question is, has the ECE program noticed any difference between the on-campus students and the Con Ed students who are studying at a distance in terms of their comfort with the OER or online text?
Sara and I both teach base only, so I can't speak to that directly, sorry.
Okay, if we can find out from other instructors down the road, maybe that's something that will be worth looking at by the OER hub to see how we can better serve the instructors and students. Okay, so we'll get back to the survey. All right. Okay, so now we're going to look at costs. And the question is, how much do you spend on textbooks for one class? And we've got the majority are saying over $100. Some are saying $50 to $100. And very few are paying less than $50 for a textbook. And what would the students have preferred to spend their money on, if not textbooks? Well, they've mentioned groceries, transportation, bills, tuition, and savings. And so it sounds like it's one essential cost versus another. They don't have the luxury to spend a lot of money on books. And so my question to the panelists is, are students avoiding buying other resources they need for learning? And did some students buy devices or pay for internet access to gain access to the OER? In other words, were there other costs incurred due to OER use?
I did hear a student had like in terms of accessibility again, they had to buy a new laptop. It was probably about 12-year-old laptop, so it was not working well with the OERs in terms of like it just wasn't loading pictures, it wasn't loading the some of the links that were in there. Again, it was more of like an issue with the system, so they had to buy a new device for it. But other than that, it does now work with our school Wi-Fi and at home, so none of the extra internet or stuff like that. And again, we didn't have to pay for anything for our OERs to work. It does work mostly, like 90% of the devices works with it. So at the moment, I haven't heard anything, like any incurred expense.
Our students need Brightspace access anyway, and a device anyway. That's expected from them from the beginning of the school year. So yeah, like they have to use tech for many different things, not just having the OER. So I don't think it was like an extra cost. It was, they maybe had to buy a laptop or device to start off the school year, but that was expected anyway. So no extra cost specifically because of the OER.
Okay, I guess. Okay, Donna?
Well, maybe I'll just mention that this isn't necessarily something that we've implemented at Sask Polytech at this point, but in other schools, they've set up something with their printing services or with their bookstore that allows the OER to be printed. So if people do have a preference for print or that makes it easier for them for whatever reason, that can be made available. Usually there's a nominal cost. Our printing is the faculty rate for printing, I think, is 3 cents a page. So it would be something that will be set up either by the library or by the faculty. And then that might be a nice option. You know, we haven't really explored that as well, quite as far as we need to, but it would be a really nice option to have available for people that had a strong preference or had maybe for accessibility, that was the option that they really preferred or needed.
Did any of the panelists have any other comments they wanted to make about the costs and cost savings for the students? Okay, all right. So we'll go on to the next question. And the next question is a bit similar to what we've already seen. So I'll approach it in a slightly different way. So this question is, do you prefer print or online textbook? Most people say either one is fine. And then out of the remainder, half prefer the online textbook, half prefer a physical book. The advantages of a printed book is they like the tactile sensation, they like the ability to take notes, there's lower eye strain, tech glitches don't get in the way of using the book. And the advantages of online text, some that we've already seen before, are there's portability, they're easier to search through. Have you ever found yourself reading a book and thinking, oh, I want to press on this word and see where else it's found in the rest of the book? It helps when there's a reading disability. It makes for less clutter. Imagine you've just finished your program and you've got however many books you've got, and now you're going to move apartments, let's say. It's a lot of books to account for. Now, here's the point I want to focus on regarding online textbooks is they can have interactives and quizzes. Textbooks could too, if they were accompanied by a CD-ROM or an online quiz that you would link to. But with online textbooks, they're directly embedded in the book. So that's what I'd like to ask the panelists about is, how do you feel about in the interactives and quizzes? Are they beneficial? Could they be designed better? Do they really bring that much benefit to the learning experience?
Personally, we've used for example, we're going to have an assessment next week. It is quite vital to have that quiz rather than reading through the entirety of, like, if you have 3 learning outcomes for that one specific text, I have advised and I have seen people use it quite often now, how great it is to just review certain aspects that will be in the quiz, and it helps you get in the mood of like, yes, I've read that definitely, but I don't need to reread everything again or look through all of my notes just to go through it before the assessment. So the quiz are quite vital, though we have not seen quite a lot of it at the moment. We haven't used it, but in other OERs that we have seen, they have these. They even have like links to different types of like matching, different types of like fill in the blanks, things like that. But in health and safety, we haven't used one yet. But I do see like the benefits of it, and like some students will feel great having that quick recall activity at the end of like the learning outcomes that they have done. But I also feel like it needs to be very, very specific in terms of, is it just, oh, I needed to memorize a certain aspect of it? Like, it needs to be open-ended enough that you actually can feel if you understood the learning, and not just like, oh, I needed to remember a name or a date, or I needed to like go back and look through it again. Like, the quality of the questions and the quality of the quiz is also important, so that we made sure that it's actually doing or like testing us in some way.
Okay, so through my ears as an instructional designer, what that tells me is that the instructional design work is extremely important. We have the learning objectives for a course, and it's best if the questions actually are aligned with those learning objectives. And yeah, sometimes it is a matter of it being just a question for to spark memory, to get the students to memorize a certain concept, because it's base knowledge that they need for something else. And it's important to have questions, like if it's a question about analysis or comparison or creating something, creating a plan for young children. The questions need to be well targeted, and I'm guessing also, Kriztel, that the feedback provided needs to be targeted and effective as well. So the instructional design of the questions, along with the rest of the content, is very important. Does anybody else want to comment on the interactive capabilities of OER and their impact on learning?
I'll just say that so we have the OER, and then we have the Brightspace learning outcomes in addition to that, right? And so you can click the reading of the OER, go into the chapter, etc. But then in Brightspace, as you click through the learning steps, that there are already like matching and quizzes and all of those things. And so while it's all like accessible through that one hub, sometimes I feel like they are a little like they feel separate, because the student's not just scrolling through the OER and here's the quiz or matching at the bottom. Like, I think that's what Kriztel's referring to. When you go through Brightspace, that's where all those activities are. And so Carrie, who adapted our OER, isn't here to comment, but she might have more kind of insight into that. Like sometimes too, there are things in the OER, like a video that is also in our Brightspace page. So I feel like maybe it's difficult to decide what should go where sometimes.
Well, one thing I can comment on as an instructional designer, to answer what you've just said and to answer Myra's question in the chat, which is, where is it preferable to have the quizzes, in the textbook or in the course? As usual with instructional design, the answer is it depends. And one of the issues is if the textbook is the main thing that the students are learning from, multimedia principals will have that the questions that you ask are best placed near the material where they're studied. So if you have a textbook and you have Brightspace separate and you've got your textbook here, but your questions over here, just having to manage different platforms can be a little bit of an impediment to learning. Now, if the students are focused on learning from Brightspace, that might be the place where it's preferential to have the quizzes. And it also depends if the quizzes are being tracked for grades. Now, that's a practical issue. That's not a learning issue. So you want the grades to be tracked and they inserted into the grade book. Okay, that's different. The quizzes will go there. But there are actually learning benefits to having them in a specific format. All right, any more comments here? Okay, so we'll go back to what I believe, we'll go back to what is the last question on the survey before I have more general questions for the panelists. Okay, now there were various qualities that the OER were listed as having in the survey, and the ones that are listed in bold on this slide are the ones that were seen as more important. So the ones that the respondents valued the most were that the OER be relevant to the course, that the material be current, that it be accurate. They appreciated the coverage of the subject. They also appreciated the table of contents. And I imagine that's part of the searchability. It's easier to search online through a book than it is to search in a printed version. Other qualities that were also mentioned was the level of reading required. So for anyone who's not familiar with developing materials, educational materials, one thing that we do is we make sure to adjust the level of reading. And so if you write at too high an academic level, okay, you're conveying something, but is your material actually educational? Is it effective? So you have to account for the level of reading. The ability to find information with OER online, it might be easier to find them. They also value the index. They value the accessibility features. They value the objectivity of the material and the ease of navigation. And some of these characteristics are respective of online OER. There can be print OER. You can print them out and it still has an open license on it and it's still an OER. But some of these advantages are more related to the fact of an OER being an online resource, which is the more common thing. And so I wondered if any of the panelists had anything to say about these qualities and whether it's difficult to implement them and how much impact they think they have on learning.
I feel like the main thing in terms of like the OER, and again, like this is kind of enveloping on the issue that we have with other textbooks as well. It's just that it is extremely heartbreaking to spend so much money on a textbook when less than 10% or even like less than 20% of it is used. So I feel like in terms of it is quite important to have OERs, especially if we won't have to make such a big sacrifice in terms of financing these textbooks. So I understand the importance of it. And now that Leah is using it as an OER, we have covered all of the chapters. We have used all of it. We've used 80% of like the books, and all of her materials are within the OER that we're using. So it is really, really relevant, and it makes such a big impact in terms of like our education, in terms of like the quality of the course that we're taking. We don't feel like, even if let's say I was sick and I took off, that I missed such a big chunk, because everything is so connected within the OER. So like even if I wasn't in the instruction day, in the instructor's day of it, it's fine. It's fine because everything is so well connected. It's so well thought of, and like it seamlessly goes into everything in Brightspace, into the teaching material, into the course itself. So I get that the connection to the course is really, really important. But again, we focus on like, well, the other textbooks as well, is the pros and cons of it, just paying for so much money. And again, this is not just within our ACE program. We've heard horror stories from students having to buy all of these, and like they open the book maybe twice in their semester, or like they're only giving access to like the quizzes and stuff and not even looking at the course material. So I feel like it highlights why OER is important in terms of like connecting to the course and stuff like that. Again, we look at the bigger picture of like textbook and OER, like physical textbook, things that comes with it. And it just, at the moment, we really, really feel like OER is so, so important, and like moving towards OER is, we need to, like, it cannot be. And I see like the value of physical textbooks for other people. But again, like what you highlighted earlier, the good thing about OER is you can print it. I can't put physical textbook online. I can't put it on my screen unless I take a picture of it. So the flexibility of it, I feel like that's what students are highlighting with in terms of OER. And I feel like that's the most important aspect right now. We have too much stress. We're already doing too much. Thinking about these on top of it, it's just not helpful at all.
Thanks, Kriztel. I think that's one of the first times I hear of a barrier to learning being the mental stress of all the costs in managing these things being itself a barrier to learning. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear a new aspect of barriers and enablers in education. Does anyone else have anything to say?
Well, one thing I'd like to say is, well, since we're piloting the OER in our base program for the health and safety course, one thing I would like to see is the OER is awesome. Somebody's done a lot of work to connect it and make sure that it is a textbook that's very specific to the course that we're teaching. But as we're going through, we're finding little glitches and maybe errors and possibly material that doesn't necessarily apply to Saskatchewan. There's things that are very specific. So if once the OER, someone puts in all that work to create this OER that fits our course, if an expert reviewer even just went through it, made sure the content was definitely applicable for childcare and childcare regulations, we need to be very specific to what's happening in this province. And so just little things, I had students, when I discovered this, when students possibly pulled content out of the OER, and I thought, where did they get that from? And then I found it in the OER, and it wasn't necessarily applicable to our regulations in Saskatchewan, and they weren't from here, so they didn't know that was an error. So just having that expert reviewer go through, someone who knows the content, going through proofreading that OER before we release it to students would be super helpful. That's my one kind of piece of advice for creating OERs for courses.
Okay. And in an ideal world, when we design courses, any educational material, courses or textbooks, in an ideal world, we have another instructional designer look at the work. When a subject matter expert develops something, we have a subject matter expert review the courses. So this isn't, what you're proposing isn't restricted to just OER, it's all educational materials. In an ideal world with enough time and money, these services are provided for so that we can give the best learning experience we can to the students.
I was just going to mention, I mean, one other practice, since I've read a little bit about how to do an OER, but like I say, we're still working out some of those pieces, is there can be an error checker that service that the library can offer. So as people are going through the OER, students can anybody can really, send in a note and say, hey, here's something to look at. And I think sort of at the end of the term, there might even be a draw from all the people that have submitted something to the error checker, just to encourage people to, if you see something, just throw it in here and we'll go back and we'll deal with it immediately. So the idea of the peer review is certainly an important part of any textbook, but I think there's some other processes with an online textbook that we can look at as well.
And one of the options provided by BC Campus is that once in a while you'll see promotions from them where they'll pay someone to review a book, and they'll have calls for reviewers occasionally, paying people roughly $500 to go through a book and review the quality and the accuracy of it. Now, among the participants, we have Ivy Poulin, who has written an OER. Now, Ivy, I contacted her while you were speaking to see if she was open to answering, and she has accepted. So my question to you, Ivy, would you feel, in your experience of developing an OER, what has been its impact on students, and what would you do to improve the OER?
Well, first of all, I apologize. I don't have access to a camera. I wasn't expecting to speak, but my OER was a physical assessment resource for health science students. It is a resource that can be utilized by many different types of professionals as well as students. And that was a big positive of this resource. Of course, it was to reduce textbook costs for students, and we certainly, did that. We eliminated a $180 textbook, and this resource is completely free. The information, it was really nice when you put up the things that people liked on that slide, because I thought, oh, good, we've got those all in our textbook, so I was pleased. But I think one of the most valuable pieces of my work, and I certainly didn't do it alone, I had a lot of help, was that it's the nuts and bolts of physical assessment. There's no fluff. So students, and someone was just mentioning about, not being able, I think it was, I don't want to murder the name, Sayana.
Oh.
Yeah, I think she mentioned that, if you miss something and you go back, you don't need to read everything in the textbook. So our courses or our modules are directly linked to the course material that we are providing, and it is just the nuts and bolts of physical assessment. So people can just go in and they can review one piece of physical assessment, which they like, because we know that you have to read something that takes more than 3 to 5 minutes, we're probably going to lose students, even professionals, and videos are the same. If you have too long of a video, then it's the same idea. We created videos for all of the physical assessment systems that are included in the book, which are also, we're just in the process of editing. That's proved to be a very big job, and it took a long time to get that all organized because there's so many moving parts with different professionals. So in terms of the process, had no idea how big this was going to be when I first started. It took us the full 2 years. We actually asked for a couple of month extension. And I researched and did all the content myself, as well as all of the graphics. And I'm also the actor, which I did not want to be in all the videos. But the biggest piece that I was so grateful for with this resource, and we're going to build on it. This is just a start. We want to add LGBTQ stuff. We want to add, Indigenous content specific to physical assessment. So it is going to grow. So it's sort of a work in progress. It's kind of my baby that I'm going to probably just continue to work on. However, it's in a Pressbook format, and Janine Bruce, the administrative assistant for the CMPP program, did all of that work for me. Like, she put it all into the Pressbook. I organized all of the quizzes and the case studies and all of that sort of stuff, but she's the one that made them pretty. And I think 50% is content, but 50% is visual pleasure as well, and the different types of resources that are available. The other person that was very instrumental was Dr. Frankie Verval, who did a lot of review of the material. I did the research, I put together all the information. However, she was sort of my peer reviewer, as well as the rest of my colleagues in the Master of Nursing program. So I certainly did not do this alone, but it was a long process. I absolutely love that it's not copyrighted, that it's free for anyone and everyone. Our students in the course that I'm teaching in the NP Masters program right now is the Diagnostic Reasoning course, which is foundational in the nurse practitioner program. They have to review all of their physical assessment, and they have to do OSCEs. And OSCEs are horrible. Everybody hates OSCEs. But this resource allows them to get the nuts and bolts information right at their fingertips. They can practice. There's checklists. There's all kinds of printables that they can download and print. There is, and thanks to Donna, we were able to put in a section where viewers can evaluate the resource. Through Pressbook, we can look at the different types of metrics in terms of who's looking at it, how often are they looking at it, what are they looking at the most, those types of things. So that's very, very helpful to help us to improve the resource.
I will need to wrap up the session, but thank you for all those views. Thank you. Ideally, at some point, maybe we'll have another panel on the developmental process, but thank you for providing a new view on how OERs can be developed, and that, yes, it is a lot of work, and that ideally it does involve people from different work perspectives, because different stakeholders have different inputs that they bring that enrich a book. So for everyone who is participating, I'm going to share a link to the OE Hub. There are a group of us who are working on building a foundation of knowledge for the institution. And so you can find information there on different aspects of open education. And if you want more information, you can reach out to us so that we can help you along with whatever initiative you want to take with open education. We also have a poll here for you to respond to. And as you respond to it, I would like to ask the panelists one last question. We only have about a minute left in the session, so with just the briefest of answers, can you please tell me what is one thing you want the audience to take away from this panel?
That students benefit. There's no the cons outweigh the pros, like exponentially, and it's so helpful to students.
As a person who gets to see the numbers, like it constantly astounds me how much these textbooks get used. So the particular textbook that we've been talking about, the ECE 142 one, has had 436 visitors, 2,390 pages since December. So just in the last couple of months. So if anyone has any doubt it's being used, hopefully that puts that to rest.
Leah or Sarah?
I agree, the benefits of using an OER far outweigh any disadvantages to using the OER. My students have certainly appreciated it. I had a brief conversation with them before doing the survey, and they was very positive.
I would echo that because Kriztel is a student in my class, and you've heard her voice on the matter. I do want to highlight though too that there's so much behind the scenes work that goes into OERs for those who are writing them or adapting them. And I think sometimes students just are like, kind of like, why isn't there an OER for every class? Like if Leah has one or Sara has one, why can't I have one for every class? And so I think there does need to be even more of these types of sessions for students or faculty that really highlight how much work goes into the back end, because we don't just snap our fingers and have the perfect OER. It's tons and tons of work. So that aspect doesn't always get highlighted, but it is so beneficial for students that, like Sara and Kriztel have both said, it's worth it to start using them.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for your answers. Thank you to Kriztel, Sara, Leah, and Donna for participating in this panel. Thank you to Megan for your moderation of the chat as well. Thank you to everyone who's participated in this panel and as an audience. And so this brings to a close the events that were planned for Open Education Week here at Sask Poly. I'd like to give a personal thank you to Donna, who organized all of these events. And my personal thank you comes in the form of, it's gratitude for Donna's support. This is one of the kindest people you could ever have on a team. So if you ever have to reach out to Donna, you can be sure that you're going to be getting excellent help with a lot of care. So thank you to everyone for participating, and I wish you all an enjoyable day. And I hope that this has inspired you to work with OER. Cheers.